I don't really know how to start this.
Do we want to introduce ourselves?
Okay. Hey, my name's Eileen, and I'm a third-year industrial design major at the Rochester Institute of Technology.
I'm Ben. I'm a fourth-year mechanical engineering major at the Rochester Institute of Technology. This is Roderick. He's a second-year hospitality major at the Rochester Institute of Technology.
This is Manny Banani, our mascot. They'll be accompanying us today. So we just wanted to talk a bit about our project. It's the journey of collaboration between a designer, myself, and an engineer, which starts off pretty simple. We just wanted to work on a cool project, but little did we know it would take a bunch of weird twists and turns, and actually we learned a lot of things about the way we think, the way we communicate, and how we're educated. So, yeah.
I like that.
Thank you. All right, so we're just going to start off by talking about why we wanted to do this. Ben, you want to go first?
Yeah. I wanted to do this project because I was frustrated with the lack of creativity in engineering. I thought I wanted to be an industrial designer, so I created my own industrial design class, and, well, we'll talk about what we figured out later.
Yeah. And I wanted to do this project because I feel like there's so many scenarios where I've heard people say, oh, it would be so cool if design and engineering collaborated. But that's kind of either it stays as something that is suggested, like, oh, it's cool, or the cases where I've been exposed to this collaboration is, say, formula, where there might be a designer doing what they call, like, arts and crafts, so they're doing painting and stuff like that. Or in a course like engineering design tools, I took that course and I felt the design part of it was still quite superficial. It was taking a structure that was sort of predetermined and just sort of accessorizing it rather than working with the form and really, getting into the nitty-gritty of design. It seemed kind of superficial. And so I wanted to explore the extent to which we could really collaborate.
The idea originally was that we would swap roles. I, the engineer, would do the industrial designer's job, and her, the industrial designer, would do the engineer's job.
So, like,
looking at a calculator.
Tolerancing and, like, coding stuff, building stuff. Doing
feasibility studies, wiring, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And Ben would be doing ideation, sketching, prototyping, model making, that kind of thing. So you can kind of see where they start to overlap. Yeah, another thing I wanted to mention with this project was that I wanted it to be community-based because I realized I really am interested in, like, delving into groups that I'm not familiar with and having to do research and immersing myself to understand what people are experiencing and taking that and having it influence my design work. I'm not sure if Ben, were you terrible?
I didn't care.
Yeah, I think he just wanted to be handed a project and, like, work on it.
I wanted to make something that looked cool.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to make something that was meaningful to me, which was the community part. So.
For the longest time, we didn't have anything picked out to work on, which was starting to really worry our advisors.
Mm-hmm.
We talked to the Center for Civic Engagement and Leadership on campus, and they connected us with a few nonprofits who had some engineering design projects that they wanted done to help them run more smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, though, we turned these down because the community part had already been done for us. We wouldn't be meeting people in the community and getting to know the community and trying to figure out what their wants and needs and desires are. All of that had been done for us. We were just going to be handed a project and told to make a blender that has fewer blades or make a wheelchair that can do wheelies better.
It feels like I'm cheating. It's like, let me go find a group that needs help. So we're given a group that needs help and we're like, okay, let's go be heroes. It's kind of ingenuine. It's just this feeling of guilt that it's not really coming from us. It's coming from what is perceived as good, if that makes sense. There's been a lot of, like, back and forth in terms of, like, what community should we engage with? And we try to figure something out with downtown Rochester, but I mean, because we weren't from Rochester, we would have to start sort of from scratch in terms of understanding the community, their personality, the needs, the history. It would be a project that would span much more than a semester, and we did want to go through the entire process in a semester.
And it turned out to be a good thing. The global pandemic that we're all in the middle of now would have made it very difficult to engage directly with the community.
Yeah.
Out of the four of us here, only Roderick was from Rochester, and he's actually from Avon, so not even Rochester.
Anyway, so what community did we decide?
We ended up choosing the dorm community at RIT. We wanted to focus on the impact that dorm living has on freshmen when they come into RIT, and how someone can take a place that's wholly foreign to them, a place that they kind of even didn't get to choose, and how they make it into a community, how they make it into a home for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was also much easier for us to access and do research because we were on campus all the time, and dorms were, not far from where we were studying from academic side. And we also had contacts that we knew who lived in a variety of special interest housing that we could get in contact with and, interview. Yeah. Speaking of special interest housing, what is?
Special interest housing is communities in dorms that are all brought together by a common interest in something.
Mm-hmm.
For example, there's Engineering House, which is mostly engineering students, but it's a floor of one of the dorm buildings dedicated solely to students who are interested in engineering. Likewise, Computer Science House is a floor solely dedicated to students who are interested in computer science. Moose House is a floor solely dedicated to moose. Mice?
Mouse.
Who? Art House, House of General Science, the International House, are all similar.
Yeah. And the reason why we wanted to look specifically into special interest housing was because, as opposed to regular housing, because they're trying to tailor the floor to accommodate these people's interests, the way they design their spaces would be a little bit different and therefore interesting. So we were trying to understand what kind of design helps create a sense of community depending on the interests of the people in this case. So for example, I went on a tour of Art House with one of my friends, Jess, and it was really cool because you walked in the halls and right away there was artwork adorning the walls to define the space that was Art House. And they had also turned one of the little dorm rooms into a lounge. And so it was this really tiny, dingy, spot that, honestly you wouldn't really want to be in, but I assume that if you liked the people there, you wouldn't mind all piling onto the old couch and watching a movie off the projector, which is what Jess told me they like to do. Everyone just, goes in there and it's cozy and nice. They also turned one of their bathrooms into what they call the mess room. I think that's what they call it. But basically it's kind of half storage, half do whatever you want and make a mess and it's okay. So all the hair dyeing takes place in there. I think if they're interested in special effects makeup, they do it there and make a mess.
Almost like a workshop for artists almost, it seems.
Yes, but they also have their lounge, which is a larger space, and they have easels and light tables, and they're all on wheels, so you can configure the room however you want. And we bumped into the president of Drag Club when we were there, and they were telling us how when they were preparing for a drag show, they cleared everything out to the sides, and they were having little mini runway walks up and down just to rehearse, which was really nice. It's super multi-purpose. But that's an example of special arrangements that are made within a space to create a sense of community for these specifically art-interested people. Okay, so at this point, our advisors were super concerned because it was halfway through the semester and we still had no idea what we're doing. But we had determined that we were interested in space and products that define a space.
And how a space can influence a community and vice versa.
Yeah.
While we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for our vehicle project, I was also conducting a couple interviews with some of the engineering professors about what their journeys were, how they designed with a user or an audience or a community in mind out in industry. Because user-focused design isn't something that's really taught to engineers, at least not in my experience. Thank you. I also wanted to talk to them about the role of creativity in engineering and if engineering made people creative or made them less creative.
We'd also like to preface this by saying this is purely our experience. Our observations don't define all designers or all engineers. It's just what we've observed. So, yeah, we're fully aware that everyone has a mind of their own. But anyway, so who did you talk to?
I talked to Professor Leipold and Professor Lanscoot in the mechanical engineering department. Both of them had served some time in industry for various companies before coming to RIT to work as lecturers. One of the things that stood out the most is that both of them seemed to agree that engineering education might not make people more creative. It might make people less creative because there's a very specific engineering process that we're taught to follow. But in order to be a good engineer, you have to be creative. There seems to be a dichotomy here, a disconnect. And as we went through this project more and more, we started to try and understand how we might be able to bridge the two.
We also interviewed the Theme Park Enthusiast Club, which was actually the most helpful interview for me because it was an example of the culmination of all these creative entities that come together and collaborate with engineers to create something awesome. Like, I think something we take for granted is how much work goes into building a roller coaster or an experience. And something really cool that stuck with me was when they said that designing an experience at a theme park involves musicians, story writers, directors, like filmmakers sometimes, depending on what the experience is, and then all kinds of engineers.
Everybody comes together to make an experience that's as immersive as possible. That makes you feel like you're not just on a roller coaster ride, but that you're
living a story.
You're in a different reality for a small slice of time. One of the things that stood out the most to me is one of the members of the Theme Park Enthusiast Club said that when you're working on a roller coaster and you have all these very different disciplines working together on a common project, you first have to learn everyone else's vocabulary, which I think is an awesome lesson that, I'll be honest, I still haven't internalized, and I'm still working on it.
Yeah. And that'll come into play a little later. But yeah, so that was really cool. And clearly there's proof that a lot of fields have to come together and collaborate to create something awesome. And it's something we can't avoid. Like, I can't design on my own for the rest of my life. And an engineer can't engineer stuff alone for the rest of his life. And that's why industries have teams, because we have to work together. So, how do we do that?
I don't think anyone would want to ride a roller coaster that was designed solely by an engineer. Our project, as we set it up eventually, was going to incorporate us defining a space for dorms on campus, and then defining 3 or so products that would give that space the ambiance, the definition, the atmosphere, the energy that we wanted it to have. And we also plan to have each product be of a different size. One would be very big, one would be medium size, one would be small.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess if you imagine a space how I see it is like there's a lamp here, there's a chair here, and maybe there's like a water feature here. And on their own, outside of the space, they're kind of just, objects. But when they come together within the space and live, it gives that space life, and it defines the feeling, and it defines the tone and the mood. So, yeah. Anyway, we're going to show some keywords right now, right here. And so at this point, we had been able to whittle down our objective and our project statement. And so our primary objective was to encourage cross-collaboration between engineering and design. And our project vehicle to communicate and push forward our main objective was to design a system, either product or spatial, that improves student dorm living at RIT. Here's the scary part. Our advisors were still shocked that we had not defined a product to start working on. Sorry, Bruce and Kim. Anyways.
It's all part of the learning experience.
Yeah, it's part of the process. Trust the process. All right. So Ben started taking a stab at ideation. So let's describe how this started.
I have only ever ideated for something in a group setting, mostly just for engineering classes, the only 2 engineering classes that have been application-based that I've taken so far. Mm-hmm. So when we sat down to ideate, I expected that it was going to be a group exercise where we bounced off of each other's ideas and added to each other's ideas and just built up and up and up like the Tower of Babel. Eileen had different ideas. She wanted to ideate on her own to collect her thoughts and understand what was going on in her head. That stressed me out. Doing it by myself stressed me out. But I said to myself, well, I'm supposed to be doing the industrial designer's part, and this must be how an industrial designer does things, so I too shall ideate on my own. I didn't know what I was doing. So
how did you feel?
I felt scared and frustrated and stressed and nervous and anxious, and
it stressed me out because Ben was like, I can't do it on my own. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, we have to do it together. And I was like, no, I don't want to do it with you. I need to do it alone. Because that's how I'm used to doing it. I like to sit by myself, think of a bunch of stuff, come back, talk through it, go back and refine my ideas. So you being stressed out stressed me out.
Clearly Clearly one of us has commitment issues and the other one has dependency issues, and this ideation process wasn't helping either of us.
Okay. I also wanted to mention that, just so you guys understand where we're going with our project, we made a list of categories as well, in addition to the keywords, to help us, actually have something physical to think off of. I'm putting them on the screen now. How did you feel about your ideas?
I didn't like them.
Why?
I thought they were bad, first and foremost. But second of all, I thought that they lacked purpose. I didn't know why I was making these sketches that I was making. I didn't even really know what I was trying to sketch. I was just drawing whatever came into my head.
But you had keywords at this point, right?
Yeah. I had keywords. We had defined a purpose for the project. In the classroom definition sense of ideation, I would think I was probably doing it 80% correct. Mm-hmm. But it felt wrong because I wasn't considering the keywords when I was ideating. I wasn't considering the process or considering the audience. I was just trying to mash ideas together until something looked cool in my brain, and then I would try and transfer it onto pen and paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as we talk about this, we're going to show just some images of what Ben has sketched. Why don't you talk about a few ideas that meant something to you? Okay.
So these 2 images are the first 2 pages of ideation that I did. most of this was focused on the manipulation of light, on how you could use light to define a space. On the next page, I didn't like any of these. One of them's a bench with little slats of wood that move up and down. One of them's a water bottle filling station that's a little more interesting to look at than the usual ones. But the one in the upper left corner was really interesting to me. I saw this as a snack machine where you would purchase a snack and then it would be distributed via some sort of marble run. Admittedly, this would limit the snack machine to mostly round snacks. Eileen, on the other hand, interpreted this sketch as a snack machine where in order to make your selection, you had to control a marble as it went through its marble run, its little maze. And where it ended up would change what you ordered. Mm-hmm. In the lower right portion of your screen, you can see what may be the most groundbreaking, life-altering product ever envisioned by a human, the snack tree. In an attempt to redefine snacking by college students, I sketched an idea that harkened back to the days of picking apples in an orchard peacefully with your family and friends, without a care in the world, as the hot summer breeze wafted over your face. Mm-hmm. And you'd whistle a tune to yourself with the birds. Uh-huh. Oh. Anyway, Eileen thought that this method of pulling snacks off of some sort of mechanized tree might be prone to robbery. Eileen offered a counterexample when she shot down my idea like a dead duck. She described a snack machine that was still shaped like a tree. It had these big tube-like branches, and inside the tubes was where the snacks were, and it would have like a little spring or a little rotating mechanism that would push them out. So you still got the shape, the form of the tree, the feelings that a tree would invoke, but without the possible kleptomania exposed mechanisms of the idea that I had come up with, which was later explained to me by Kim, I believe, that you shouldn't shoot down someone's idea if you can't offer a solution or a suggestion. That stuck with me.
So apparently I offered a solution. Yay.
This page was dedicated to trying to explore privacy and personal space, but with non-physical barriers. My thought was perhaps you could use some sort of indicator, maybe a little slider that changed colors or a little light that changed colors that you could set on your desk that would indicate to people that you were available to talk, or you were busy and didn't want to be disturbed, or you were working, but if someone came up and disturbed you, that would be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like forming a barrier without forming a barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that sort of tied into this idea that if we have a community space, it should be able to accommodate both extroverts and introverts. You should be able to feel like you have your own space, but
you're not cut off from the rest of the community.
Yeah, and likewise from an extrovert's perspective, they can still interact with other people.
I want to talk about my lava lamp legs idea. This is a good idea.
Okay.
That's all.
All right. So, Ben, tell me about when you were in the car and you had a revelation.
This was March 31st, 2020.
Okay.
Before we get into this, I want to point out that Eileen has written on the script, Ben reached a realization about how designers and engineers think, but was unable to communicate it to me. Unable to communicate it to me is in bold. I'm not bad at talking with people.
You're not bad?
Yes. Anyway, Eileen and I were driving through the relatively empty streets of Kearney, Nebraska, when a lightning bolt shot down from the clouds and struck me between the eyes, and I had this epiphany. I realized the difference between how engineers and designers thought, and to me, that was the reason why there was always this disconnect between engineers and designers communicating and collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back, and I set up at the chalkboard with a piece of chalk and failed for the next 3 hours to explain what was going on in my head. What was going on in my head was something kind of like this. Hopefully it'll show up on the screen.
What? What is this?
You can put the little picture with the circles up.
Oh, the one that you did in PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. I was
wow,
like,
in PowerPoint.
Oh my gosh.
Just oust me like that to the whole world.
Okay.
Ben doesn't know Adobe.
Oh my goodness. So, this diagram that you're seeing on the screen is already what came after our discussion when he was able to clarify it, but at this point, it was a mess and had not been defined yet.
This is effectively what I saw in my head.
Yeah.
So
here, okay, we're going to show you a different image now, which is the enormous chalkboard explosion that happened as we were discussing. Basically, Ben started off by writing existence, things, attributes, and disconnect on the chalkboard. And I don't know if you know what that means. I had no idea what that meant. I was like, what do you mean? What is the problem? So if you look at the bottom left corner, there's this very vague diagram of circles. I think E is for engineering and I is for industrial design. Ben is trying to draw out our way of thinking. But he has not labeled any of the circles, so we don't know what the process is.
The labels aren't important. What's important is the process.
Oh my God. So I was like, okay.
This is already, I would like to point out, an example of the difference between how engineers and designers think, as we would later discover.
I tried to understand what he was saying. So I wrote down, bottom center, what I understood the engineering process to be and what the design process was. So in Ben's case, he was working on a drone project for his senior design course. The way I saw it was the project was given and they had to determine what it was meant to do. So they probably had like a function list or I don't know, something like that. And then afterwards they were like, okay, how do we make these things work based on the requirements of what we need this thing to do?
Yeah.
And in my case, under design, I have 1 project given and 2 blank. So I guess at this point, Ben must have said something ridiculous that ruined my train of thought.
That's entirely plausible.
I think I got frustrated because I made another diagram on the bottom right that is clearer. So engineers...
The entire board is just Eileen making diagrams out of frustration.
So my understanding, engineer is given a problem. They write down the results of the problem, i.e. what they want the outcome to be, what they want the functions to be. And then they identify how to make those things happen. Whereas in my case, I'm given a problem. I need to redefine the problem so I can understand it before I can start solving the problem, which involves research, understanding, that kind of thing.
The difference, as I tried to explain it, was that engineers are less concerned about what a problem is unless it becomes absolutely pertinent to know. Engineers are more concerned with what are the results of the problem and then how they can fix the results. But designers work in a more linear fashion. There is a problem, they want to know what the problem is, and then they want to know what the results of the problem is, and then they want to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was really interesting to us when we kind of finally nailed it down, because designers are thought of as these kind of floofy, spacey...
artistic, no structure. I don't know.
But their thought...
I'm generalizing, I'm sorry.
Their thought processes are just that, a process. It's very linear and methodical. Whereas engineers, who are thought of as being methodical and kind of these like humanless soulless, faceless machines that crunch numbers actually have a less structured thought process.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of just goes where they think it needs to go,
Yeah.
when they think it needs to go there.
And that's why at the top there, if you see that squiggly mess, I wrote, engineers are a mess. They work in the moment. That's what Ben was just describing in terms of you see a problem right in front of you and that's when you go to solve it. Like, it's very much take it as it comes, right?
Obviously, we're making blanket statements that might not always be the case.
Yeah.
But this is what we've observed personally in our own development as an engineer and designer, respectively. And I've observed this kind of thought process and this kind of thinking in enough of my peers and enough of my experience in industry on co-ops and internships that I can say with some reasonable certainty that even if we're not entirely correct with this, we're not far off the mark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I thought was really interesting is how we found that engineers seem to already have so much information in their head that they feel like when given a problem, they're able to act immediately. So going back to the taking action right away, it's because you already feel like you know enough to go forward. Whereas in my case, I feel like I have to kind of start from zero and build up my knowledge before I feel confident enough to approach a problem. And so I wrote in the center there, engineers act based on existing information. We hate research. I'm sure not everyone hates research, but Ben hates research.
I hate research.
And in my case, act based on new information. We love research. I don't know if all designers love research. I love research.
I love research when I have to.
Yes, and that's the other point, is that if they're lacking that information, then they will go and find that information. But it seems like a bit of a, I'll go do it. I don't know. In his case, anyway. So this brings us to the whole Lego scenario, which has been a really interesting case study for us, because growing up, I never cared for Legos. But on the contrary...
I still care for Legos.
Very much so. Here's a montage of Ben's little Lego creations right now. The interesting thing about Ben and his Legos is he's able to pick them up and just create something. And I've always found that really fascinating, because I was given this project quite a while back where our professor brought in a box of Legos and was like, make something. And it was like the most stressful period ever for me, because I can't make something if I don't have a purpose. Or if I'm not creating it for somebody, I don't know why I'm making it. Which is kind of weird. I feel like I might be on some weird far end of the spectrum. But I was just really uncomfortable. And I did end up making something, but it didn't mean anything to me. And I thought it was super insignificant. Because it didn't serve any purpose. And it's not to say Ben doesn't make Lego stuff for a purpose. He does, but the purpose is different. It's an internal purpose. It's to satisfy his own need for creative expression, whereas for me, I want it to serve an external purpose. So that was really cool. And it also showed us that, at least the way I see it, is because he's able to create something from a stack of Legos, he's got an image in his mind already of what he would want to make. Like, he's pulling all this information of what he knows.
From things that already exist.
And creating it. Whereas I have no reference point. I don't know what I want to make.
And you don't know why you're making it.
Yeah. To sum that up, it seems like engineers act based on existing information. And designers like to act based on new information. I.e., engineers start from something, which is why so often a lot of professors in my major, well, my freshman year, one of my professors was like, was this product designed or was it engineered? And I was really upset because I was like, why do you put them into a box like that? I don't think it's fair. But...
aren't they both?
Yeah. If we're going off our observation that engineers create based on what they know, take this dog leash, for example. I'm going to put an image up right now. If an engineer was told that they had to design a dog leash that was retractable, it had a flashlight, and it had a poop bag dispenser, the engineer would go, okay, this is what I know. And they would put it together.
It's a dog leash, it has a flashlight, it has a poop bag dispenser.
Problem solved.
Check, check, check. Done.
Yeah.
Break for lunch.
But on the other hand, a designer might come up with something more like this. Where they're taking the concept of lighting, the concept of a retractable mechanism, the concept of a dispenser, and working all three of them into a form and integrating that instead of taking forms that already exist. So that was something pretty interesting as a comparison. Yeah, I guess we can summarize that by saying designers are comfortable working with the intangible.
Engineers work with the tangible. Mm-hmm. Which I suppose is probably partially a reflection of the projects that we tend to work on in industry. Mm-hmm. As designers and as engineers, we'll work on usually very different projects or very different sides of the project. Mm-hmm. But we're trying to get beyond that and figure out what makes engineers and designers tick, why they think the way they do, and how to elevate both types of thinking.
Mm-hmm. The coolest part about this chalkboard conversation we had was that it was an exploration of our breakdown in communication as we were trying to communicate. So as we were having this conversation, trying to understand the conversation. So it was super weird.
The conversation about a breakdown in communication became a breakdown in communication.
Yeah.
Which proved that there is a breakdown in communication.
Yeah, and supports the findings that we came to. So the conversation we had was very efficient. It was a case study. It was an analysis. It had a resolution. It was really good.
The chalkboard conversation was ultimately funneled to a resolution because one of us, Eileen, asked why. For me, asking why wasn't important. Asking what and how was the big thing. But the why behind it was never addressed by me, and I kind of didn't know how to address it. Which I think is a benefit of collaboration between designers and engineers. Mm-hmm. Designers ask why. They force engineers and themselves in the process to rationalize why they're making the choices that they're making, mm-hmm. why the design is taking the path that it's taking, why they're doing anything. Mm-hmm. Whereas engineers are really good at focusing on the what and the how and plowing ahead and getting things done, right, and not getting lost in distracting information or distracting evidence.
Yeah, so to give an example, let's say I wanted to create this fluffy form and Ben was trying to figure out how to make it happen. And he told me, well, we can't have this knob on this section because it interferes with the wiring in this area. It'd be better to get rid of it. If he had known from the get-go why I wanted to do it, why I thought it was important, how it's important for the experience of the user, then it might be easier for him to be like, okay, we will try to think of something to make this work.
In fact, I might have designed the wiring differently from the very get-go, knowing what the importance of that knob feature is. Here's a comic to illustrate the point.
This leads us to our next point, which is this diagram here. It's another diagram that Ben drew up that shows how designers and engineers collaborate now versus how they ought to collaborate. So if you look at the bottom, you can see that designers and engineers overlap in process. And I think that's really important because if designers are able to share their intent and their research and the human aspect, then the engineer is able to remember that there's a bigger picture besides, like, outside of just getting something done. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
They know what's important to prioritize when they're doing their engineering design and their feasibility analyses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is an idealized version of what you would see in industry or what you would see in a collaboration. I don't think it's entirely feasible to have engineers doing the ethnographic research and the initial like brainstorming and keyword generating with the designers, but to at least clue the engineers into what's going on during that process so they So they're updated so they know why things are happening and they know what progress is being made before it gets to them. Likewise, I'm sure designers probably don't want to get caught up in the minutia of feasibility analyses and free body diagrams and all that sort of fun stuff that I like to do. But to at least involve them or to update them after a project gets handed off to the engineers, to go back to the designers and say, hey, we're doing this and we're struggling with this. Why did you want the design to look like this? Or, hey, we were thinking that maybe this could be manufactured in this way, but it might alter the design this way. What do you think about it?
Yeah. So ultimately, both parties are doing their thing, like in the areas or the parts of the process where they're, most useful or most trained in. But that's not to say that the other party can't come and get involved and learn a little bit, give a little bit of input,
It's always valuable to have fresh eyes look at something, especially fresh eyes who don't have any preconceived notions about what is or what is not possible.
Yeah. Keeps everyone on the same page in terms of what the big picture is and why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Which is important. Why?
Kind of a fun analogy we came up with was Ben is the fun uncle.
Uncle Ben.
Who pops into a child's life during its early stages of development.
The child is the product that we're doing, making.
Comes in and out, does fun things with the kid, is kind of a bad influence, but not around enough to terribly influence the child. But then the child grows up, goes to college, and is trying to find a job, and they realize, oh, I'm really interested in this career path, and that's the career path that is somehow magically aligned with their uncle's. So the uncle jumps in and helps with all the resources, gives all the tips and tricks, sits down with the kid and, gives interview help and whatnot, and then the child is on its way to success. So, and of course, the parents of the child are along for the ride during that part of the process. Yeah. And what we're trying to say is that we are involved with each other's processes throughout the whole
Even
thing.
When it's not specifically our time to be involved.
We have a time. The time will come.
We're still there. We're still a part of the child's life.
Yeah. We're all there to see it through, We're in this together. Go family. So, to go back to our original project, which, by the way, we realized wasn't the most important part. We thought that coming to a realization about how we communicate and what it is exactly that's preventing us from collaborating was much more important than what we originally had planned.
The project that we pushed forward to completion, kind of as a formality, was this tree-like light structure, sculpture thing. The idea that we're trying to explore and trying to facilitate with it was the definition of a space, a personal space using light, specifying the boundaries of someone's space using a non-physical medium. So that way the person could feel comfortable in a space that it is defined for them, but they can choose to share it. It's very easy for people to come through that barrier if they so choose. And
another cool feature of it is that it's pretty dynamic. We're playing with different heights, and the idea was also that right now what you're seeing on screen are 3 trunks, or like 3 poles that come together to form.
Swoopy boys is the technical term that we engineers like to use.
Okay, I believe that. They all come together and they form the structure. But depending on the demographic, like if you're dealing with kids, maybe you want to pick out some shorter versions so they would fit in like a smaller space and feel more cozy, come closer to the ground, kind of really like a canopy. And we were also envisioning this to be able to go into a variety of different spaces. So whether that be like a dorm lounge or like an open area on campus or in the library, or surrounded by walkways in a way that people who are walking on the walkways are able to look down and see these rings, and it becomes sort of cool design. There are a lot of like ways we see it being applied. The chalkboard situation was not our first argument. We had another little squabble that came a little later.
It was our first argument.
What?
It was our first argument. It wasn't our last argument or only argument.
Oh, yes. It was our next argument. This was when Ben was telling me that
the secret to getting engineers and designers to communicate better was to make them explain concepts that to them are obvious. For example, we were talking about the design for our final vehicle project that we were pushing forward, and I thought something looked really cool, and Eileen said that it would be aesthetically ugly. And I was like, why?
Yeah, and I was like, what do you mean why? It just looks bad. I was at a loss for words. I was like, don't try to ask me to explain this. It's common sense. It's just ugly.
I'm an engineer. I don't do ugly. I don't dabble in ugly. No one's ever like, we need you to look at this linkage. And I'm like, ugly.
I thought for a second. I was like, okay, it doesn't work because these forms seem too geometric and they clash with the more organic forms at the top. That's the best I can do. And he was like, that makes sense. I mean, I don't get it, but I see that there's reasoning behind it. And so he decided that he then would also explain like more engineering stuff to me to help me understand.
Hi. Welcome to Framing Change number 3.
All right.
We are the victim of technology here, so we've had to switch to a different device to finish this out.
Okay, so where were we?
Making engineers and designers explain ideas and concepts that seem obvious to them.
Yeah, and I got really pissed. I was like, this is so inefficient. If you're expecting people to explain things about the reasons why they're doing something to someone who has not been trained in your field, it just seems like a waste of time, right? Like if you asked everybody right now working on a team to be like, okay, now you have to explain the minutia of the decisions you're making. It's like mansplaining times a million. Like, why would anyone want to go through that?
But at least I understand where she's coming from. I can see her point of view better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, if we expect this to be something that's implemented right now at this moment in companies, it's going to be extremely inefficient. But Ben's response to that was
to implement it in education as early as you can with students. So as soon as they come into college as freshmen, you're encouraging and fostering cross-collaboration between engineers and designers right from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're learning each other's vocabulary right away instead of learning in separate environments until like their 4th year during a capstone or something when they have to come together for some reason, and then they're not able to understand where each other's coming from. And that raises another question, which is, well, if engineers are working with designers, will they get more creative? And conversely, would designers working with engineers become less creative? And that's something that we weren't really sure how to answer and won't be able to answer right now, but
I think the best way to answer it is to just run the experiment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an optimist, and I think that overall it would be best for everybody. I think everybody would benefit from more collaboration earlier in their education career.
Yeah. If we start them young, then they'll blossom, and then eventually it'll be something that's naturally incorporated into the workforce. What we meant to also say was that this is something we observed after our second little argument. We looked into schools that did have more like hands-on applied approaches. They had these programs where everyone was getting together to collaborate year one. Like right off the bat, you're a freshman. Maybe you don't have a ton of knowledge going into it. Maybe you're not too sure how to solve a problem. But you're given the problem and you have to think creatively about it. And then later on, it's supplemented with other courses like thermostatics, whatever. That would solidify that understanding.
Additionally, as students progressed through their career, they still had project-based application enforcing classes. They didn't lose that after the first year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where did we see that?
Saw that in universities like MIT, Bucknell, Harvey Mudd, Franklin W. Olin College of Engineering, Massey University in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. So it's out there, and it's easy for us to say, oh, design and engineering should collaborate more. But it's hard to see them really come together and communicate because it's just...
I don't think anyone's used to it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is used to it. So it'd be good to get the training down early.
I think by the time that people begin to collaborate, they're so used to their own way of doing things that trying to understand and work with someone else's way of doing things is such a hassle.
Yeah, it's a big ask.
That they're like, well, I'll collaborate if I have to.
Yeah, so learning to be flexible early will help.
No harm in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's kind of it.
Like how we had to be flexible when our second recording device died.
We said a lot of really good stuff in the previous recording, just so you know. We're trying to hold on to it. Anyway, that's kind of it. We definitely didn't go into this project expecting to make a podcast or a video at all. We thought we would be given a project, we'd do a bit of research, we'd draw some stuff, and then we'd 3D model and prototype everything, make beautiful renders, and put it into context views and like all this wonderful stuff. We didn't do that, and I did not wire anything up. I did not, code anything fancy, but I don't think that was the point.
That's not what became important.
Yeah.
The cool thing about this project is that what's truly important about it, we didn't even know existed at the beginning. It's something that we discovered along the way.
Yeah, after our 3-hour-long argument. Yeah, but sometimes that's what it takes. Yeah.
Thanks for coming with us this far into the ride. We know it hasn't been super linear. It wasn't super linear for us while we were working on it. Mm-hmm. So, of course, it's not going to be very linear for us while we're explaining it to you.
Yeah, but if you're still here, thank you for sticking with us. We appreciate it, and we definitely learned a lot from it. And we really hope that this can be something that's taken forward in education. We don't know how, we don't know when, but we'd love to see it happen because it's awesome.
We don't want to see it stop with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And please feel free to comment below your thoughts. We also apologize again for blanket terming everything or like making generalizations, but
we're right.
No. That's how we have done it so we can understand it better and communicate it to you. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap and spectrum stuff, and not everybody's the same.
Exceptions to the rules.
Yeah, this is our confusing journey. And if you're interested in seeing us make random stuff, we have maker Instagrams. You can totally follow us here. They're not serious. We just like to have fun. So if you'd like to keep in touch, also.
We like to be creative. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can always be notified when we upload a new video about the collaboration between engineers and designers. The moose says like it.
We're just kidding. We're probably not going to put up another video about this, but yeah.
We don't know that.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Okay. For now, feel free to follow us on our social media.
Let us know how we can improve and augment what we've done.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts. All right. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.